So, and this is the Introduction to Multispectral Image Processing with Pix4D Mapper session. Here in the online from the GitHub agenda, you'll have this link as well as in a number of other redundant locations for getting your data. I want to put a shout out also to the rest of the IGIS contributors, because everybody on the team is in one way or another contributed to this exercise, and so I can't take all the credit for it. So, and that includes Andy and Maggie, Shane, Chippy, Annie, and Robert Johnson, that you'll get to know through other sessions of this DroneCamp. All right, again, if you haven't downloaded your exercise data, you'd want to unzip this on your PC, save it to your desktop in the DroneCamp folder. Something to know, just as an aside before we continue any further, Pix4D has a limited ability, has a limit of 256 characters in its entire file directory line of characters that it can use. So if you have a project that gets too deep inside of your drives, and this happens on servers every so often, like our IGIS server runs into this problem a lot. Also on desktop, sometimes if you give your file names, your project a really long name, and it's on your desktop, which is under your users, and then Pix4D, and then like it's buried in your directory actually when it's on your desktop. This adds about 25 or so characters, and then this can eventually make you run out of space. You just have to be judicious about your naming conventions and where you place this data, or the project won't work and when you hope it will. For that reason, sometimes I use the C drive, but some people in workshops don't have access to work computers on this given C or whatever drive, so we recommend the desktop for now, and hopefully this shouldn't be a problem for anybody. So the data, I mentioned there's the video that's available on the agenda that you can refer to, as well as in the exercise. This site is from my father's ranch up in El Dorado County. It's a small area. The trick with drone data is it tends to be enormous, and most of the projects we do are fairly large, just way too much data for a workshop environment. So I have this just relatively small set of data. Examples would be, we have some projects that are in the hundreds of gigabytes for one area, just for one single set of flights. And a regular project, just the imagery alone in multispectral data, it runs around, just one single flight is around 12 gigabytes for on a Matrice 100 that can fly almost a half hour. So that just wouldn't work out for downloads and practical use on a laptop. And then the processing time for that can be anywhere from 6 to 12 hours, 6 to 17 hours on a laptop as well. GPS, now on the bottom of the screen, you'll see three terms: data, GPS, and Pix4D. These are three folders that are inside of your Intro to Pix4D exercise folder. The data folder has the raw imagery in it. We'll come to this in a few minutes. The GPS folder has your ground control points, and the Pix4D folder has two pre-processed packages for you to open. And this, again, to help us get through the exercise in a reasonable amount of time. Today, we're going to touch on some things that are of just starting off, or what I consider the most important things is hardware requirements, because you're not going to go anywhere if you don't have enough for the correct hardware. The stages of processing and the fundamental processing options. Again, the first portion of this session will really revolve around just getting oriented to both the exercise and the application. How to load and verify your image collections. The correct geopositioning of your data during the data processing. So that's including the GCPs in your processing, essentially. Radiometric calibration of multispectral data. And what that refers to is I'd say the concept, for lack of a better term, of calibrating just a I wouldn't say completely arbitrary, but a relative digital number for, say, blue, and a digital number for green and red and near infrared and red edge, calibrating that to a reflectance value of 0 to 1 to represent how much light is being reflected off of that surface in a calibrated format. And the way you do that is you use a white panel and to normalize to. Think of it kind of like white balancing, but more scientific. Then we're going to talk about recognizing the fundamental aspects of processing quality report. Maggie mentioned that Pix4D gives us one of the most robust of quality reports, and so we're kind of lucky on that end of things. And then understanding your file structure of your data outputs. This slide is included in there. It's redundant, but I've included in there for folks that come in late, and also if for the sake of having it on the shared drive. Here's my email. I have virtual open door policy with answering questions. Just know I'm really slow to get it back to people, especially when we're doing a drone camp or we get a ton of emails at once. IGIS also has office hours that are open to anyone at normal times. You would want to go to the IGIS, or just Google UCANR-IGIS, and on the website you can find a location for going to office hours, and we're happy to help everyone as much as we can. With that, stop sharing, but my Zoom window's in the way. Have it? All right, very good. All right. Following step 1 or step 0, or during step 0, you should have created your DroneCamp 2020 folder on your desktop, and then unzipped the intro to Pix4D to this file folder. And inside of that, you'll have your data, which are your imagery is 645 images, your GCP points. And by the way, these GCP points, they've been formatted in such a way to be digestible by Pix4D. This is a whole nother process that we won't cover today, but just know that you have to have you have to have a point, your X coordinate with universal transverse Mercator coordinate system. And if you don't know what that is, it'll be, again, that's a topic for another day, but it's essentially your east and west projected coordinates that can be translated from the normal GPS latitude and longitude, and then a Z value, which is your altitude of the position. Just so you know what that data is in there. And then Pix4D. This is your Pix4D project folder. I mentioned before, this is mostly for info only that I'm going to give you, just so you're oriented to what we'll be working with. These are pre-processed projects that again, take roughly, in this case, this is a small data set, so it took only like about 40 minutes on my computer, maybe a half hour. It's not a super fast computer, my laptop that is. But the first 2 files that you see, these are the Pix4D project files, and they're basically an organization file that points to either the data folder or to the, backed up one too far, or to a project folder that has been created along next to it. Example, inside of this project folder, I'll see the initial processing, which includes the processing report, and we'll get to that in a minute. You'll see densification, which is your point cloud data that you usually don't need later on in GIS. You'll have your digital surface models. You'll have extras, including a digital terrain model. And the index includes either reflectance, because in the instructions, I'll say don't process just with the digital number. You want to have reflectance, and the other layer will be less quality then, so you won't need it. But this is where you find this data. If I were to go into, say, the reflectance data, or in this case, I'll go into the indices, into the NDVI. This file right here is ready for GIS. Again, I'm showing you where you could go with this data. If I were to take that NDVI file, dump it in and pull it into my GIS, it could look something like this. It's already mapped to the ground where it should be in its correct spatial referencing and so forth. And so this is where you work on your mapping or your analysis of the data that we're creating. Again, by the way, this is almost like reversing time. I'm going backwards in time from the end of the project of what you would do with the data to where you're going to be at today, just so you know where you're going with this process. So for everybody, if you already haven't done so, go into your Pix4D folder and double click on the through step 3, the Pix4D project. And it'll take a minute to come up. Hopefully it'll come up. And Andy, if there are questions, you might have to relay them to me because I can't see the chat window from when I'm sharing my screen.
So far, so good.
Okay, good. I'll just break in. I'll try to make pauses like this every so often, but then we'll. I do want to get through the material. All right. So when your Pix4D project comes up, what you'll initially see is the map view. So again, this is, yes?
Real quick, you might want to mention if, so you've already had it open, they're going to have to link the images, the data file.
Oh, okay, yes. In some cases, I corrected this in the last week. If you downloaded the data last week, actually before Sunday, I found a bug in this process, and the bug made it broke this project a little bit, not entirely, but it broke it to a certain degree. And so it won't know where to go to the data. And so, and I don't know if I can unbreak this in efficient time right now. If it came up and you weren't able to see your project, what you would do is click the OK button, back up in your directory, and then navigate to the data folder, select this folder, and then it'll point to the data folder and you should be able to open it at that point. The other slight bug that you'll find out at that point is that what I'm going to show you next is the different view. Your ray cloud will possibly be broken as well. This is the representation that Maggie was showing you on a different project in her presentation. I'm changing the navigation view. If you bring it up, what I did is I just clicked the navigation at the top, and then what you see is the initial processing sparse point cloud, and the blue dots on the imagery are the original positions based upon the telemetry data from the Red Edge camera that collected the data. The green positions are the remodeled locations, and the way that these are remodeled is that each image that can see a multitude of points, this data essentially re-engineers the correct position and orientation of these points in space, and that's how it identifies what the best position should be. And so that's what this is showing here. If I were to go down and turn on my densified point cloud, you'll see it get to be much more robust. And now if I move around, you can see the structure from motion or the characteristics of the terrain. Again, you can be following along with this right now if you want, but it's mostly for just your information. There's also the triangle mesh option, which will essentially shrink wrap in this case, this is a green band because the Red Edge camera has 5 individual sensors that will, and they can't represent it in a true color format very effectively, so it just represents green as a black and white stretch. The 3D mesh might take quite a while, so I'll just jump out of this, but it'll fill in holes. Sometimes that looks better, sometimes it doesn't. Other things to know, if you go up to the top, there's the quality report. Along the top of the window, you'll see a variety of options. Under the the project, you have the options of saving and viewing different data from using different tools, utilities. You can open and close projects, etc. Under project, or process, there's a variety of processing options that you'll have. View will give you a redundant option of the same view pane that's on the left side. Ray Cloud has some various navigational character or tools that are associated with it, and so forth. Below this, you have the ribbon that you can see your camera points. If I click on this, it'll give me a list of camera points that are actually that when you start up your project, you'll be able to see. You'll get familiar with this. It shows the coordinates, the latitude, longitude, and the color of the camera. When it comes to the images, there's 5 simultaneous images that are captured at each picture point. The image point or the picture point is the first 4 digits, and then the 1 following this corresponds to blue, the 2 corresponds to green, the 3 corresponds to red, near infrared, red edge, etc. This is a little bit important to know in what'll be in the next hour of how you register or how you set your GCP tie points up. But this will give your camera parameters, your MicaSense red edge 5 band with those bands included there. So again, this is the direction you'll be going with this project. There's also the quality report. There's a GCP function which we'll deal with later. There's the quality report option. After you go through the first stage of processing, and this won't be available to you initially before you do processing, but there is this quality report. And just so you know what's on the quality report, there's a couple things that I like to key into first. One is the ground sample distance, the spatial resolution of the orthomosaic product. In this case, it would be roughly around 3 inches of spatial resolution. That it's just good to know what the resolution is. If it's off like a lot, then there's something probably wrong. The area covered is really not very useful because it uses an area beyond the footprint of the imagery due to the panoramic edging of all the edge photos. Next, the quality check report, and I'm just going to speed talk this real quick. There's it gives a variety of different checks. One of which is the georeferencing down on the bottom. Frequently, this is either red or yellow, and still isn't a problem. It just isn't a problem usually. If you want to look at the imagery, you can zoom in on it. Here we'd be looking for aberrations, kind of like this, or seam lines, things that don't look correct. These ones along the edges, though, aren't of any real concern because they're outside the footprint of the flight pattern and are completely to be expected. It's just when you have gaps in your imagery that you'll really have to, you want to be more concerned with that. Quality report further, 101. You got your image point collections, the blue points being the GPS, the green being the corrected positions. And then there's uncertainty ellipsoids that circle these on the report. Then there's a horizontal and vertical error potential there too. You want to see that this is all green as often as possible, but don't worry about the edged red points. That's to be expected. Then if I zoom further down in the report, something from Maggie's presentation is the number of matches between images. If there are gaps in here or one of these points somewhere along here are red, which will indicate that it's an uncalibrated position, then you need to that's kind of a warning sign. If any of these things are a problem, this will be pertinent in the exercise later on. You'll have the option of selecting your processing options down in the bottom right left-hand corner. Inside of your processing options, there'll be 3 stages of processing that you'll be doing. Your initial stage, you'll want to go down to your advanced box and turn it on. You go to matching, and if it doesn't look, the imagery doesn't look like correct to you, like there's some dropouts or there's gaps, there's not enough key points that there's not enough overlapping match points, then you can toggle between the matching settings to get a better result. And then you'll have to reprocess your project to see if it works out.
Sean, can I interrupt real quick?
Sure,
In
absolutely.
the chat, it sounds like a lot of people were saying like they can't find the images and stuff. I think some people downloaded the 0-step exercise beforehand and completed that, but haven't downloaded the actual data.
Great.
So if that's the case, I'm going to post the link. I think that tiny URL is broken. Sean, it says that's been put in the trash, so I'm going to put the other link right here. If you still need the data, and this is a different group of files than what was listed in the exercise to do when you installed the Pix4D.
Mm-hmm. Also, if you go to the agenda, you can download this here. It'll take a few minutes and you can get it set up. I mean, we're not in any race. And I'm just giving you, I'm a couple minutes over what I was planning to do on my overview, but what I'll do here to help you out as well. If you go to the agenda, go to the exercise, and the exercise will show up and look something. Where is it at? Here you go. This URL should work. I checked this the other day, and let me make sure that it oh, it is saying it's in the trash. Oh, Andy did. Uh-oh. I'll fix that. Do you have the correct link, Chris?
I posted it there in the chat.
Okay, great. All right, so that's there. Well, if it's only one little glitch, then that's hopefully not too bad. Just one other thing that'll get people to, it's usually once you get going on the exercise, that's the least of our problems, is because we have directions for all of that. It's the hardware and the data setup is the difficult part. You just make sure that you are working on a Windows system that, in this case, this project was done on Windows 10. You need to have at least a 2-core CPU. And if you don't know how to do this, you go down to your search at the bottom, search your control panel, and this will give you information about your system. One of the things is that when you bring up your project, and I'll bring up the RGB project, if you can see your imagery in this view, then your GPU or your graphics card is sufficient. As long as you can see it, you'll be able to do the exercise. As well as you have the rest of your settings that are okay. Let's see here. Just a little orientation to the exercise, and I'm going to let you take off and go now that I just kind of gave an overview of the program. It's a couple little tips. I'll fix this URL in a second. Well, when you all get going, here's a link to the video for about the site if you're interested. It's not important right now. The first section, data orientation. This is just, for the most part, just read it and then you're good to go. In the exercise, because we have a group so large, we had 111 people registered for this section, and usually it takes a couple helpers for every 20 or 30 people. What I did is I created tiny URLs that will bring you to a video tutorial of the information. When it comes up, you just click on it. Each one is about 10 minutes long. This is good. This is mainly for if you go through the exercise steps and you don't understand something, it'll give you the whole workflow over the course of a video for that given section. So there's one of these for every one of the sections from step 2 on. Step 3 and step 4 then follow, again with tiny URLs for the video directions. With that, I'm going to relinquish my screen sharing and I'll monitor the chat window, and if we could reconvene, I'll jump in at about 5 after. This will take maybe almost a half hour. So I'll come back on at 11 o'clock and start giving answer some questions. I'm still going to be answering questions, but but 11 o'clock I'll come back on, and then 11:05 I'll give a little presentation of some of the tricks and tips for how to do your ground control points and your radiometric calibration. Sound good? And I'm just going to go through the exercise really quick from memory, and you can see all of the steps. Again, all of this is also on the videos that are available in the exercise, so you can refer to those as well. I'm going to do a very abbreviated version of the videos. The videos are more robust. So what I'll do is I'll go back to sharing my screen. Great. And we can set up breakout at the end of the hour. I'll set up a breakout session maybe, and have everybody come into that, and we'll try to work out any of the other issues and questions. Sound good? And Andy too, if you see stuff on the chat that is pertinent to other than that, or suggestions, please shoot them my way. Same with you, Chris.
Will do.
Cool. So here we go. So I'm going to go into so what I'm going to do first is I got to get my Pix4D up and running for the project. I'll double click on this. Usually it's on your desktop. Sometimes you have to search for it in the search bar below. This whole exercise is based on 4.5.6. There's not a lot of difference between the generations of the software. There's quite a bit of difference between the old Macintosh OS version that's no longer serviced, but but yeah, most of Pix4D is typically it's pretty standard. What's changed is behind the hood or under the hood. Initially, you'll see the most recent projects that you've worked on. You'll have an open project process or possibility. But today we're going to be clicking create new project. The first thing is you'll want to point designate your project location by going browse, go desktop, DroneCamp 2020, into your Pix4D folder, again into your Pix4D folder, and this is the folder location that we're using for our projects. So I'm going to put it there. First, though, before that, just for the sake of don't worry about this yourselves. I'm just going to copy this back up a level. The reason I copied that is because next I want to create a Pix4D 2020-0609 holding pen MS folder, or name for the project. Just a little note, I like to put naming metadata in my naming convention, so I know that this is a Pix4D project, the date that the flight was done, some kind of name. I usually use location for the position of the data, and then MS being short for multispectral. That could be RGB. I also sometimes will include _100M for the altitude of the flight, just for use. I can also check use as my default project location if I want, and then I'll go next. Now, adding imagery, there's two ways you can do it. You can either click add imagery right here, but my preference is to go to my data folder. I'll drag this over, click one of the images. You can examine your images here to see if you want to bring one up to see what it looks like, but I'm going to click on one of the images, press Control-A for select all, and just simply drag them in. I like to watch them, make sure that all the images went in. This isn't a big deal when you just have one pane, but if you're pulling it from multiple folders, sometimes I've missed the Pix4D project folder and it didn't actually go into the project. Next, I would go down and click next. And again, these are the steps in the exercise just in rapid fire. This pane will show you the information about the images. I mentioned this already before, so I'm not going to recover it. But these geo positions, sometimes called geo tags for these image points, can be exported to a CSV or a text file by going, and what I'd suggest, going into the folder and give it a name like MS geotags. That isn't really useful for this given project right now, the actual Pix4D project. But if you want to bring in the positions of your data for your GIS later to establish a footprint, or to be able to just use, say, 10% of the area with 10% of the flight on the outside of it for the best spatial and spectral results, you can use those geopositions for that to create clips or masks. Always leave the coordinate system the same default. You can only get into trouble by changing that in general. You can always change it in your GIS later on too. Next, you'll have a variety of templates. Templates are the basic settings that I usually like to switch later, to adjust later on in my processing options. But the basic ones that you'll have 3D maps, which is the most common probably. That'll create an orthomosaic DSM. 3D mesh, which is that stretched, like shrink wrapped version of the imagery over a point cloud. So you get those files with the 3D maps automatically. 3D models only gives you a 3D mesh and point cloud. Then ag multispectral gives you reflectance and indices. And then the rapid functions process at approximately 16 times faster than the standard. The value of that is if you're in the field and you need to check your data really quick, if it'll process here, it will process here for sure. Last, there's the advanced, of which most importantly is your thermal data processing. This will give you the best product of thermal data as long as you have sufficient overlap and you haven't had like heat conditions change rapidly, but sometimes it just won't function very well. It just doesn't stitch well, in which case you'll have to go up to your map functions and play with your processing options later on. You can, by the way, you can adjust, you can create hybrids of all these things and create your own personalized processing steps too, or templates. Don't ever press the start now button when you first start, because that'll mess things up for you. And then I'll click finish. When you get into the when you see your first view, you'll see your points on the surface. Hopefully they're where you're expecting them to be, and so they're and if they're not, or there's gaps in there, and you do have image gaps sometimes where your camera doesn't trigger correctly, then that might be of concern. But this data set is fairly good with a 90% overlap in a lawnmower type pattern. And you usually want to have higher overlap if you're flying over forestry. Less overlap just doesn't work out so well in general. These I got to get my zoom windows out of the way to be able to see the next steps. So once this data is in, you can go to your quality report, which I already showed. Well, it actually hasn't done a quality report yet. You can do your image processing editor. So if you say you wanted to get rid of this picture, I could identify it as image 26. And then you could go into your image process and disable those if you wanted to, but we don't need to do that for the sake of this exercise. Let's see. Once this is in, I should probably refer to the exercise to remember what the next steps would be. But for what we've done is what we normally do is go down to the processing options are in the bottom. This gives you the 3 stages of processing. This is where I mentioned, where I started talking about before and left off before when I realized people were having a hard time. Is at this point, that zoom window is in front of things. There we go. So you could load it. You can change your template here, just like you did on the earlier pane. But you want to click Advanced. Go up to your matching. In an area with a lot of topographic relief, it sometimes is a good idea to switch to free flight terrestrial, even if you're in the mapping template. Calibration, leave that as the default. Go to number 2, your point cloud and mesh. Deselect your last file and select on your point cloud classification. This will improve your digital terrain model, which is essentially a model subtracting anything with an exceedingly high slope angle, such as trees, houses, that sort of thing. So you end up with a smooth surface of theoretically the ground level without the features on top of it. I don't include the last file in there. That's the LiDAR default laser range and detection file format. That's an elevational point cloud. It's sometimes a rather large file, and you don't need to clutter up your hard drive with it unless you really have a purpose for it. The Pix4D kicks out a digital surface model and digital terrain model, which are derived from that last file automatically. So there's, unless you really, really want to play with the elevational points, and you don't need that usually. I also don't really need my textured meshes because I'm doing mapping most of the time and not doing some kind of 3D representation. Advanced, that leaves it all the same. It just indicates that the image product at the end is your green band in the with that point cloud that we looked at. Once you have all of these settings done, then you could click OK. Normally, and I said this is rapid fire. I've got this up to the point where you would be done with step 2 for sure. Going into step 3 of the exercise, what I would do is go to my, oops, I meant to click processing. If I click processing, then you'll get these functions that come up. What you don't want to do is have them all clicked, and today you don't want to also click the start button at the bottom of the screen, because that will lock your computer down running for several minutes, and we've done this processing for you. If for any reason you ever wanted to do something on your computer, I mean anything more than web browsing, you could set your resources of your processing down a few notches on your CPU and your RAM, so it doesn't tax 100% of your computer's capacity while it's running. So with that said, if I go
Sean,
back
there's one question. I haven't ever run into this, but one of the participants says they see the red dots. So when you open the project up, but
Yep.
the underlying base map or the base image map is not showing up.
the base image map, but there's red dots.
Yeah, they see the flight path, but not the
Oh, I know.
not the
Yes.
image, not the background base map image.
Yeah, let's see.
There.
Let me see if I can recreate this. There you go, like that.
No,
No.
I don't. No, they see. I think they see the red dot where the camera took images, but they don't see the base map. So the images that's coming from
the background.
Whatever service is providing that background image. Yeah.
That might be a bandwidth issue where people just don't have enough speed. And then you can also toggle between the maps and the satellite function at the top. If they're working on a Mac OS, that's where that's almost always happens.
That sounds like what it is. So.
Okay. Any other questions? Let me go. I'm going to go to the chat window. I'm going to stop share so I can see the chat window. If anyone needs help in a breakout room, go ahead and put your hand up right now. I'll create the backup, the breakout room. Go and help people out for about 7 minutes, and then come back to go over the next steps of the exercise. All right, everybody. Let's see here. So I think I'm surprised it was only 6 people that really had issues, and it looked like half of those folks had the problem was that they were working on a Mac OS. Mac OS hasn't continued with the update since 2018, so there's some issues there. So fortunately, this actually is. I was expecting more difficulties than this, honestly, with this kind of data. It's sometimes I like our associate Shane Fire says, working with GIS is like an exercise in insanity. It'll work right once, work right again, and then all of a sudden it'll break for no apparent reason. And even if you've done the same thing 3 times in a row.
Sean, as people are potentially logging out and logging back in, there's one question in the chat window about what are your thoughts on the recommended settings for RAM and the number of CPU threads to give Pix4D the general processing options.
I was answering that in the chat, but I didn't get completely through it.
Yeah, that's Chris, you wanted to?
Here's my short answer. If my computer is doing nothing else, I leave them at the maximum. If my desktop here, if I'm doing email or doing even word processing or something, I'll put them at the same time. I'll put them down about half, because otherwise during certain steps in the process, it'll sort of freeze things up for a little bit, like you're typing and no words show up. Or I've even, I'll set it at half, and actually I may process 2 sets of images overnight and just set them both up at half so I don't run into issues.
Yeah, that's a great tip right there. I do the same thing. We'll get a large project, I'll set both projects up at half and they'll let them run overnight. That's one of the things, just so you know though, if you're running a large project and you run into your limitations of RAM, your random access memory, that's really, it gets maxed out fairly easy depending on the size of the project. If the project has to write to your hard drive instead of running it through your RAM, it'll turn maybe a 1-day project into a 1-month project because it's so much slower. And I mean, that's not much of an exaggeration. You wouldn't want to wait a month, but so you might have to break that project up a bit. But yeah, if you run out of your RAM allocation, then that can be a problem. Great. So back to the exercise, and so one of the things, this is actually one of the reasons why I created the video tutorials and put them in the exercise to show like where the buttons and levers are at, is that it's expected that we'll have technical difficulties when we're doing this kind of exercise. And even as canned as it is, it's still, there's just issues and licensing and you name it, issues that come up. But you'll be able, you could freely do the exercise through the in the next days if you feel so inclined to, and just refer to the video tutorials for that. But I'm gonna plug on here real quick and just go through the next couple of steps that you would do. This next step will pertain to people that don't have a Mac OS, because as we just found out in the breakout room, one of the issues folks are having is that this project was created for a PC and it doesn't work on a Mac OS. So what I'll do here for the next, starting into step 4 of the exercise here. This has already been processed for you, so we're going to go through step 1. This would be as if that we'd executed processing step 1, but not 2 and 3 already processed. When this comes up, in some of your cases, it might require you to point to the data folder. And it'll look just like what you had before, but if I bring up processing, then it'll show that the initial processing is complete and checked off. To add GCP points, I'm going to skip some of the other things. Usually you'd look at your quality report here and go over the things that I looked at before. But instead, what I'll do is I'll go to my RAID cloud, and you'll see the images laid over the sparse point cloud, and you won't have a densified point cloud generated yet. That happens in step 2. But what we'll do then is go up to the GCP, actually you could click off the cameras and arrays, go up to your GCP manager at the top, the icon, go to import GCPs, browse to the GPS folder, and select it there. And that's that table I showed you at the beginning, and it'll populate this pane right here with the information that's provided. Then,
Sean,
yes.
Before you get further, Rosa has a question, and
Yes.
I wasn't paying attention. I was doing something else, so I don't. She's asking, why would you do this step separate?
Oh.
And I guess is that the processing step 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. So the reason why we do this in a set a separate step in a different stage, is that Pix4D has to establish its key points right off the bat. You can't do it before it has got a general reference of the positions of the images and relative to the ground. So you got to do this before you do the stage one, if that partially answers the question. The other, and if you're talking about like the mile high view, kind of, I don't know, pun intended, but if you're but an overarching kind of concept of the adding GCP points is that if you want to get your imagery precisely located on the ground, so you can do change detection from one date to another, then you might want to add GCPs for that reason. Or if you fly the site with, say, a RGB camera and a multispectral camera and a thermal camera all together, then you can, at that point, then you can fuse all the data sets together into one and know that their positioning is matching. And then you can use, I mean, figure out various, I don't know, complex mathematical formulas between, say, the thermal characteristics and the NDVI to establish what the health or not health of the plant are. There you go. Probably more information than people needed, but there you go. That's the GCPs though in a nutshell. So GCPs, these are the points on the ground. And yes, please feel free to just jump anytime that you, yeah, there's a good question there. Like I said, I can't see the chat window. When the sparse point cloud comes up and you deselect the cameras and the arrays, then you'll now have GCPs and MTPs, or manual tie points, that window that pops up. And inside of that, you'll see 7 points. I have to move my zoom window so I can see what's going on here. Where can I put it? That it won't be in the way. I guess over here. So under this, you'll have a number of points. If I click on the first one, on the side, you'll see the properties selection window pop up. And if this doesn't pop up, there's a little box at the top right-hand corner that will allow you to toggle it on and off. I also can go to the navigation pane at the top, click on the trackball setting, and then rotate it so I'm looking straight down on it, and you can use the roller button to be able to zoom in. So if I toggle between these GCPs, you'll see different ones light up that are associated with the corresponding number. When it comes up, I'm going to differentiate what the difference is between a GCP and a tie point are in a second. I'm going to adjust this window. This window can, by the way, be resized here with the little toggling on and off, or you can change the default zoom here. You see that little box on the bottom of the screen down here? That's the black and white panel that I put out on the ground that is your ground control point. And it's sometimes they're semantically like ambiguously included together, being GCPs and tie points, but this is the action, specifically this is the GCP, and the tie point is connecting the project to that. So I'll use my roller ball.
Sean,
yes.
Real quick before you get into that, there were a couple of questions about when you enter the GCP manager, about the horizontal and vertical accuracy, and they're asking if they should put in, you know, if they should get that information from their RTK GPS, or you know, that it's defaulted, you know, 0.02 since the accuracy information isn't in the CSV. My understanding from Pix4D is not to mess with that unless you have a really good reason, just to leave it at those default numbers.
Honestly, yeah, so that's a good question. And realistically, like you said, don't mess with it is what Pix4D recommends. It's not really that important for Pix4D. Those values are only important for ArcPro use. So in ArcGIS Pro, you have to have those values in there or you can't do your adjustment process. Pix4D it's not really relevant. These are just accuracy outputs in this case from our Trimble unit to say that it's within whatever 2 centimeters of accuracy. Anyway, so now back to where I was at. So I'm going to go, I'll just kind of restart a little bit. So once I get into this window, I like to set it so it's more or less fits tightly with the navigation pane. That way, when I toggle down through these or flip down through them, they stay roughly in the same spot, and otherwise they'll kind of edge their way up slowly but surely. Starting at the first one, I can use the roller to roll out and look for that weird checkered looking box. Then you go in and you can check on the center of it. If I back out a little bit, you'll see then a tie point has been established for that. So that's tying the coordinate, the coordinate that's given in the table that we were just looking at, to that position on the imagery. Since image 54.1 and image 54.2 are really in the same position, then I'll want to toggle down through to at least another image position before I'll add another tie point in. I can scroll back and now you'll see it over in another location. Sometimes though, it's hard to find these, so if you press your space bar, then you can zoom in and find it a little bit more easily, and then press your space bar to get out. In the exercise, what it'd call for is doing this for at least four different positions. And once you've put in a couple, you'll get a little green mark for the modeled idea of where it's at. If that mark is way off, keep adding points. If it continues to be way off, then you might have to do something later on called rematch and reoptimize, because because then the model of its positioning isn't quite right. So I have 4 of those in there. If for any reason you didn't like some of these, you can press cancel or to delete what you haven't applied yet. Or in the case of the exercise, you'd press apply. And then you can see it has a little bit of an added little feature on the map then, that it shows that it's got tied to that GCP. The one time when this comes up where it's an issue is on some of these, since this is a forested area, if I go to the first GCP on the number 4 ground GCP point by just clicking it over here, and then I press space, I zoom out, you can't see a GCP because it's hidden by the canopy cover. So you just skip over that one and then just go down. So this is 105. I'd want to go down, say, to 137, and then zoom out, look around. Oh, there it is. It's kind of obscured, but it's not under the trees anymore. So then I can click it there. Sometimes it's harder to spot some bands than others. So if I go to, say, my near infrared band, then it's a little bit more clear. But I wouldn't want to have like image 1, 2, 3, 4, all of one image point selected, because then it would over heavily weight the value of that one image point over, say, 137 to like 104. See, that one's nice and clear from that angle. Then I would end up adding 4 of those. You'd want to do that for at least 4 of these 7 ground control points. After you were done with this, what you would do, go ahead.
Can you demonstrate one thing that I found was I had a problem with until I figured out what to do? But let's say you were looking at one of those images where you couldn't see the marker, and you accidentally mark that image like randomly. Can you show people how you would delete that where you marked it?
I always just go up and press cancel.
Oh, okay. If you're hovering over it, you can hit the delete button too, and it'll disappear. So
the delete. Oh, if you
yeah,
go over
if you're just
yes.
If the image is just highlighted, so
yes. Okay. Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
I forget. It doesn't come up that often, but yes, sometimes an example would be you come into the first image, you can't find it, it's not there, and you accidentally click the tree, and then you're like, oh no, I don't want to cancel. I have 5 marks already. Yeah, so yeah, just hover over it, press delete on the keyboard.
Or I've even marked the wrong GCP on the ground.
Oh yeah, there you go.
You zoom out, you think, oh, that must be it, but it's another one.
Yep, yep. And sometimes, and this is really DJI's, for some reason, the elevational data that's included in the telemetry comes from its barometric pressure value. And so the Z value is sometimes way off. So sometimes you'll have to take this and take out move it down 10 meters, and all of a sudden then you can see all your GCPs. So say I just make this a 0 then, and then press apply, and it won't change it too much on this one, but then I would have to go back in there when I'm all done and add that 5 back, and then press apply again to get it to actually locate correctly.
And then there was one more question. It was how to know how to locate the GCP to which image. And I think so when you highlight over here under the display properties, when you highlight GCP number 4, basically in the window on the right hand side, the images it's going to provide to you are the images that where it thinks that GCP is. So it's going to limit the number of images that it displays for you.
That's correct. And you'll also see a little blue dot above it where it's considering its the XY position of the camera when it was taken. But usually it's somewhere relatively close by.
But I do agree with the comment before. If you have GCPs that are relatively close to each other, you could accidentally mark the wrong one. So you might want to sort of have some notes about GCP number 1 was, you know, something about where it was on the ground if you have 2 that are close together.
That is correct, yes. One thing just to note though is if you have too many GCPs and they are that close, that just means you have too many GCPs. I mean, if you just want to be flying lower or something like that, I mean, and there's exceptions to that. For example, if you're flying a small plot from a fairly high altitude, that would be an issue. But usually that's part of the value of having the map and then being familiar with your data. So if I go to number 3, I know it's relatively close to a road and on this intersection. So you just have that experience to tie to relate to it as well. So that was that essentially, once you do that, so 4 different GCPs or more, 7 is ideal. You want to have these distributed as evenly possible. If you were only going to do 4, you'd want to do 1, 3, 4, and probably 5, because those are the 4 outside most corners of the area, and then the 2 in the middle, those are to improve the area, the center area as well. It's also important if you're trying to do elevational modeling to have your center ones included in there as well. So on to the next step of the exercise would be step 5, is where you go into your processing options again. You would click on your DSM, orthomosaic, and index option, which we didn't cover yet. Inside of here, you'll see a variety of options, of which one is your orthomosaic. You'd want to deselect that, because if we have white panels, that image will be like in even a small data set like this, the output will be about half a gig, and you just don't need that extra, not as high a quality of imagery output is what you had before. Having the digital surface model on and the defaults is good. Next, I'd go to the additional outputs. And in the additional outputs, I like to have a digital terrain model. Sometimes it's valuable, especially in forest canopy, to subtract the surface without the objects on it from the digital terrain model. Subtract that from the digital surface model that includes the objects, and what you end up having is a canopy height model. So you subtracting the ground from the tops of the canopy, then you have a standardized elevation of a model of everything that then you can use in your GIS for determining a number of things. So moving on to the index calculator, this is the radiometric calibration component area. In here, it'll by default have all your camera values. What I need to do is I got to reset in my case, because I have already set these once, and so when I click calibrate, it would have already been populated with the last image that I used. But you click browse, and by the way, this is, if you look at the top, you'll see this is for blue band 1. So I want to click the first image panel and click open. A neat feature in Pix4D is it automatically detects the white area for you, but if it doesn't, you can just left click around and then add it in yourself, and then right click to close the polygon. Below that, you have to put in a reflectance factor. I just know because you can look up the number from MicaSense's website to find out what the reflectance factor is for your given panel if you don't already know what it is. When it comes originally, it should have that information for you. You can add that in here. The thing is that this white panel doesn't really reflect like 100% of the light, it just reflects 63%, essentially what that is. Then I'd click OK. And then you'll see that it has a green check. You'd have to do that for each one of these until you have them all set. So then I'd do 2 that corresponds with the second one. And again, I'd put in 0.63. The only one that's usually different is your near infrared. It just doesn't reflect as much off this type of surface that they provided. So when I put the calibrate on that one, I'll just do 0.6. And then I have to, oops, I have to do that after I pick number 4. Open, and then 0.6. And then okay. So I would do that for all of these. I would then scroll down and click my reflectance map and make sure merged tiles is also selected. And then I would select each one of these. There'll also be a reflectance layer that comes. So this is sometimes a little redundant, but you'll check each of these. The most important of which, maybe because you get a reflectance map already, is the NDVI. The NDVI one has and why I like this here instead of here is you don't get a transparency layer inside of your imagery, which is kind of not very useful in your GIS later. But once I have all of these checked, then I'm good to go. I can just say okay, or I can go down and do save template and create a new template with all the new settings that I've set up for this project if you want to use those settings again. But then I could do okay. Go ahead.
And Sean, let me point out in the radiometric calibration, I think I have a newer Red Edge MX camera, and my reflectance panel with the QR code, it automatically puts those values in for me and everything, so I don't even have to go through calibrating each of those bands. It automatically does it for me.
That's a good point. That's why I actually clicked reset on all of mine, or it would have showed up. The first time you do it, you sometimes have to do that. After that, it'll recognize the QR code and then it'll auto-populate it for you. Even if you don't have internet access, it will do it for you because it'll remember based on that QR. So yep. Then after you've got all of that stuff set up, what you would do is go up to the top. There's 2 options. There's the re-optimize and rematch are the 2 options. This is by the way for this not for the radiometric calibration, but for the GCP correction rather. You could click the re-optimize button. I'm not going to execute it because it doesn't make sense right now. I don't have all the info in there I need, but you could re-optimize. That would just spatially shift everything to the correct positions. If when you were putting in your GCPs down here and your green dots, after you put in some and then eventually you had some that were the green X was significantly away from where you wanted it to be, then you'd want to maybe rematch and re-optimize. The rematch and re-optimize will take a lot longer, but it's useful if you have if maybe you didn't have enough overlap and your project needs that. And then after you do that, then you go ahead.
It sounds like some of the people, couldn't mess with the index calculator. They were getting a message saying it's not available in that edition. So there was a question in the trial edition, maybe those options were not available.
Yep, so that's where I was getting at. That was the surprise to me just now when we did the breakout room, and why if you go to the chat window and you look, and you can use the Shane Fire's email and his login, and I believe that should give you the permissions to be able to use those other functions. Just use one of the 300 educational licenses that we have included in there. For whatever, oh, good.
Oh yeah, I was just kind of like reiterate to people. So if you are using the trial version of Pix4D, there's a small number of features that are not enabled, and it includes the multispectral indices. Is that correct?
Yes. Here's the really weird thing is I actually uninstalled Pix4D from my machine, and then I loaded a trial version using my personal Google email, and all the functionality was there for that. So I don't know why the other functions have been disabled, but I think the permissions from our student licenses should be okay. But if someone tries that and it doesn't improve it, just let us know, and it's good info to have, and maybe I'll talk to the people at Pix4D about that.
And just a quick time check, Sean. We
Yep.
got roughly 10 minutes to go.
Yep, I know. And so actually, I was just wrapping up right now and was going to leave questions and let people play with the exercise through their lunch hour as they feel so inclined. As usual, this is like an info dump on everybody. When there's experience of learning all this might take, well, quite a lot of hours, and trying to compress it into just a 2-hour block, it might be a fair bit of a I don't know, high aspiration. But the things that we covered here in those steps, they're also included in the exercise and the video tutorials, and then the technical stuff, the technical support stuff, we can help you with that as well. After you've got done with this, I mean, the only last thing I was going to show you is that after you had rematched and reoptimized, you'd click a little dismiss button down at the bottom. Then you would turn on these last 2 buttons, turn off your initial processing because you don't want to waste, I don't know, a half hour doing that again. And then you just run the rest of it. And then if you recall what I showed you at the very beginning with the 3D representation, that's where you would end up, is having that final product and including the files inside of here, like the index, which then I showed you could be pulled over into your GIS. If you ever want to find where your files are at for a given Pix4D project, what you would do is go up to your file folder and click on that, and that'll also open you up to the folders that are associated with that project. See, any questions? We got like 5 minutes or so.
Okay, I think I may have a quick answer from Pix4D on the. So someone was saying they couldn't access, you know, options on step 3, and they basically responded that they were in discovery mode, which is completely free. It doesn't expire. Like the trial version that expires after 10 days. So he had suggested that they log out, and then when they log back in, be sure to select the Pix4D mapper trial from the available license, and then they should have that step 3 functionality.
Okay, good.
So they didn't explain how they got kicked into a discovery mode instead of trial version. So
yeah, man, with workshops like this, getting the software and so forth going obviously is more than half the battle. Then after that, then it's the learning curve isn't so rough anymore. Let's see, what other questions do we have in here? Maybe I can help out with. Okay, so will we be able to use the STFire login account? Yeah, so this is supposed to be available till the end of the month. If you need help with that, then you can talk to us and we'll see what we can do. I mean, I don't think that Pix4D would appreciate me telling you this trick, but if you have multiple emails, you can just go to free Pix4D download. Once you go in there, I think this is it. Try Pix4D software for free. You'll get here, try it for free, and then you just give a different email and you can log in and get it for another 15 days. I know folks that'll do this, and then this is fully functional. How you got kicked back into the extra free one, I don't know, when I did this, then I got the full-blown trial version, again, that this exercise is built off of. So once you get all this information in here, the funny thing though is when it gets to the end of your period, you have to uninstall it and then reinstall it to be able to add in a new license. It won't let you log off if you wait until it's expired. So the answer, oh wait, hold on a second. I thought I was sharing my screen. Dope. I'm just talking out loud here. I did this yesterday, but I was in too much of a rush here. So let me get to sharing my screen and then that'll make a little bit more sense. Again, I can't see chat and share my screen at the same time. So what I was talking about is you can go to Pix4D, search for free Pix4D download and select it there, and then go in here and try for free. And once you do this, then you should get into the full-blown 15-day fully functional Pix4D software.
Okay, I'll throw out a couple of more questions for you from the chat. There was a question that the workflow would be the same if they used a multispectral camera that's not microsense or micasense sensor.
So the answer to that is maybe. It works well with the Parrot Sequoia. Slant range, I understand, doesn't really work very well. Tetracam might. They're always doing upgrades. You have to set in the template or the camera parameters and then save that early on when you bring in your data. And so it's a maybe question. The one of the reasons we like the Red Edge and the Parrot Sequoia is because they're actually owned in subsidiary companies of Parrot. Parrot owns them both. It's a Swiss company, and so they've kind of got a natural inclination to make everything extra compatible. So
and then Chris has a question about talking about CPU versus GPU versus RAM for Pix4D, and specifics would help considering buying a laptop. And I'll go and grab it and post it, but I know Pix4D does have their, I think they have a minimum requirements and then a recommended and then a best. So I can post I'll find that and post the link here to that, but if you want to comment on it.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of funny. So one of the early developer and instructors, On God Singh, for Pix4D, they didn't used to have that, and he and I got into a nice long conversation about what components to use. And what I do all the time when I'm running my Pix4D is I monitor my tasks. So if say I do Control-Alt-Delete and watch my task manager for my processing time. So I watch this stuff all the time with projects, and I figured out what was getting taxed the most on different projects. And after thinking this through, using that information is why we end up having some gaming Alienware computers in our lab. The couple, like between Andy and I and Shane, we have probably the 3 fastest computers in like most departments of the UC system. I mean, at least in not in their desktop computers, that is. They're and so they use the parameters that I talk to them about to add to their website. And what to distill all that down into something simple, the more GPUs you can have, the better. Pix4D is multi-threaded, so it processes multiple threads at one time, and it's also. And then what I mentioned before, the RAM is important because some of the processing, especially when there's trying to like organize large point clouds in 3D, the RAM processing or RAM storage is extremely important for those steps, or if it has to write to the hard drive, it slows down incredibly. So if you have a large project, our computers have 64 gigs of RAM. That's good for 95% of even big projects, unless it gets really, really huge, like when we try to process like 3,500 acres at 2 inches of resolution, it becomes a problem. He has to be split up, but otherwise it works fine. You might jump up to 120, 28 gigs of RAM, in which case I can't imagine anything that would run over then. Lastly, the GPU, the graphics card is important. Some cards are not compatible with Pix4D. Most modern computer GPUs are. That's most important in stage 1 of the processing, because the GPU allows a processing of 3D modeled data much better, or makes it possible in some cases, rather than the CPU, which doesn't allow that.
I posted their recommended, which my guess from looking at them is probably some of those may be a little bit bigger than you might need, depending on how much work you're going to be doing. But I think it was ArcGIS Pro that has the minimum recommended and best. So
yeah. And this, by the way, the minimum for Pix4D, I put on the exercise 0 too. So
okay,
you can look at that for reference as well.
Yeah.
All right, very good.
Down, yeah.
Yep, I think that's about it, unless there's any last really pressing issues here. Great. I hope that all of you like that. I'm sorry there was some kind of there was some technical difficulties with getting gear set up. There's
one other question that's sort of important was, can you include other indices other than NDVI? And I know there's a way of calculating other indices in Pix4D, but you could also do it afterwards as well.
There are, with the developer with the higher level developer engine for Pix4D, but honestly I'd do that in either your GIS or your remote sensing software, either ArcGIS, QGIS, NV, whichever one you use. That's where I'd always do those other more complex ones. And then in those ones too, yeah.
For tomorrow afternoon, there'll be GIS workshops, and they're going to calculate vegetation indices with QGIS as well as ArcPro. They both have really good raster calculators.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, if you have any more questions, go to the community forum and put those in there. We're going to collect all of the comments, and we're going to try to find a way to distill distill answers in a way that it can cover that, and then share that back with everybody at some point in the next week or so. So thank you all. I hope this was good for you, and good luck with your Pix4D efforts.